Chapter 6, Meaning of Values, page 110, the selection of values. How are we to select the values by which we live? There is widespread agreement about the existence of certain groups of values: religious, moral, aesthetic, social, scientific, economic, political, and the like. There is not nearly the same measure of agreement concerning their number, nature, relationship to each other, rank in a scale, and the principles to be used in selecting them. Our value decisions have been influenced by a wide range of traditional values that have come down to us from the past and are embedded in our language, customs, and institutions. The thinkers of ancient Greece discussed many values: goodness, truth, beauty, happiness, and so forth. Aristotle in his Ethics presented many virtues for consideration. In the West, many values have a biblical background. The Ten Commandments, the teachings of the Hebrew prophets, and the Sermon on the Mount and other teachings of Jesus have been especially influential. For Muslims, the Quran contains all the traditional values. From time to time, new values have been added: the rule of law, the principle of consent, and the concepts of liberty, security, education, health, and social welfare are examples. We shall make no attempt to set forth a rigid classification of values as higher or lower. There are, however, certain principles that are generally accepted in philosophical discussions. Number 1, intrinsic values are to be preferred to those that are extrinsic. Something is intrinsically valuable, good in itself, when it is valued for its own sake and not for its capacity to yield something else. Something is intrinsically valuable, good for something, when it is an instrument for attaining other things. Most of the things we see and use in our everyday activities, from books and typewriters to buildings and institutions, have extrinsic value. Intrinsic and extrinsic values are not necessarily mutually exclusive. The same things may be valued for themselves and for what they may bring, or a thing may be valued now intrinsically and later extrinsically. For example, knowledge may be valued as a good in itself and also as a means to other things that have value, such as economic success or power. A great work of art may be valued for itself, or it may be viewed as a means for making profit or achieving distinction. We can say, in general, that the good of a surgical operation is extrinsic. It points to the greater health that is to come. The enjoyment of a glass of wine is an intrinsic good, a good in itself. The wine is not enjoyed as an instrument to something beyond enjoyment. Those things that are sought as good in themselves are the ends we seek in life. The other things are the means we use to attain these ends. Number 2, values that are productive and relatively permanent are to be preferred to those that are less productive and less permanent. Some objects that are valued, such as wealth, tend to be used up in the activities of life, whereas others, such as friendship, tend to increase as they are used. To share the values of the mind and spirit with other people does not lessen their value for us. Physical and economic values, although necessary for life, are not permanently satisfying ends in themselves. Many people think that human experience shows that the social, intellectual, aesthetic, and religious values tend to give more permanent satisfaction than do the material values. The productive and permanent values tend to also be the intrinsic values. And finally, number 3. We ought to select our values on the basis of self-chosen ends or ideals. The values we seek ought to be our values, and these values ought to be consistent with each other and with the demands life makes on us. And that concludes this section of Chapter 6, found on page 110, the selection of values.